When introducing someone at an event like this, the typical format is to name the prestigious institutions that this scholar has attended, or the journals to which this scholar has contributed, or to the films and projects that this scholar has created. But that's not what I'm going to do. I am going to introduce Gustavo Valdivia through his personality type.
Wow.
Jason, this might be the last time you ever asked me to introduce a speaker. So there are three personality types that I have discovered in my recent work. No buts, yes buts, and yes ands. So no buts. You ask someone to participate, to be a part of something you're doing, to come do something fun, and they say, no, but good luck with your great initiative. I'll be rooting from the sidelines. Yes, but. Would you like to come participate in something I'm doing? Yes, but I'm gonna need a little more money, and I'm gonna need a featured post on your social media account, and I'm gonna need an assistant and first-class airfare tickets. So that's the second personality type. And I am pleased to announce that Gustavo is the third personality type, which is yes and. In 2016, I was working on this record where I was trying to get sounds from glaciers to create music. And I had been to Alaska and made some recordings, because that's what I think of as where you find glaciers. And my recordings were terrible, and I found them unusable. And being as it was hard to get to a glacier from Indiana, I went online and started Googling, glacier sounds on SoundCloud. And I found this guy, Gustavo Valdivia, who was recording glaciers in Peru, which was curious to me because I've been to Peru. And I've seen Machu Picchu, and I've been to the rainforest. There aren't glaciers in Peru, or so I thought. There are. And he has spent years dedicated to researching, exploring, documenting, recording. So when I asked him if I could use some of these recordings, he said yes, and you should also check out these musicians and these other people who I've been working with. So I used his recordings, thank you so much. A year later, I was working on a book, and it was about the relationship between nature and sound and music, and we invited him, would you like to contribute a brand new essay? And he said yes, and you should check out this other writer. And, if you do a book launch, let's do one in Peru. I'd invite you down. A year later, working on another book. No, a year later, we're doing an event in Indianapolis in 2018. And I said, Gustavo, do you think you could come from Peru all the way to Indianapolis? I have very little budget, and you'll speak for 10 minutes. Yes. And I think I'm going to do this whole tour of the American Midwest and all of this stuff. Could you introduce me to some people? Okay. 2 years later, I'm working on another book. We invite Gustavo to submit another essay. Small budget, meager publishing project. And he said yes. And what if we did this? What if we did this? What if we did this? And finally, last summer in August, I found myself back in Alaska for the release of this book. In Peru and Alaska, if you look on the globe, are not near each other. And I said, Gustavo, would you like to come to Anchorage and speak for 15 minutes at the Anchorage Museum? And Gustavo said yes. And would you introduce me to some people and, show me an itinerary around the Kenai Peninsula? And that's what he did. And so, round of applause for yes and. So, it is my privilege to call you a friend and collaborator, and I look forward to more yeses and ands. So, Gustavo Valdivia.
Thank you. Thank you. Wow. Well, thank you so much for that. Stuart, yeah, I don't know if I'm a yes and person all the time, but it's always been a pleasure to collaborate with you, and it's thanks to you and to Jason and IUPUI that I've been able to be here for 2 times already. And I love this city. I love all the experiences I've had here. It's an important, Indianapolis has a big place in my heart. I went to grad school in the East Coast. This was the first time, thanks to Stuart, thanks to Jason, that in 2018 I came here. And since then, I've been thinking about coming back, because today I was telling Jason that it's still one of my favorite events I ever attended, I was ever part of, was here at the Cabaret. That it was a lovely event, and still there. I keep telling people about it even today. So yeah, thank you for this. I'm very happy to be here. I'm very happy to have such a big crowd here. I hope what I have to present here is of interest to you. What I've been asked to do, and I am planning, I've been working on this, is just to give you a broad idea of a little bit about my work as an anthropologist working on glaciers, but also I wanted to introduce you to what anthropology is doing as a discipline, or what kind of new things one can do, or what anthropologists are thinking about, and how we engage with glaciers, especially during these times of that we know in the context of the climate crisis. So yeah, my presentation is a little bit hybrid in terms of it's going to move between being an academic presentation for those who are interested in that. There's going to be some quotes there if you want to read that, but I'm going to basically present some ideas that I just want to share with you. So it's just a way of balancing. I'm not going to read everything that's there. It's just for those who are interested to know what kind of reference I have in mind and what kind of sources you can also look up if you are more interested in the kind of approach I'm presenting here. But in general, I wanted to present also what does it look like doing fieldwork, anthropological fieldwork, in what it's one of, the largest tropical glacier in the world that happens to be in Peru. For those who don't know that there are glaciers in Peru, yeah, we have the largest, 70% of the tropical glaciers in the world are in Peru, and the largest is also in Peru, and that's where my field site is. I've been doing fieldwork there for 10 years. I've been working with climate scientists, actually not far away from here, who are based not far away from here at Ohio State, the Bird Climate and Research Center there, that one of the most important climate scientists in the world is based there. Lonnie Thompson, I've been with him in more than 6 expeditions. And also I've been working with artists and also indigenous people who live very close to this glacier, and I'm gonna talk a little bit about all of them in a minute. So yeah, I'm here all the way from Peru. I'm going to stay here for a couple of weeks. This is one of my first presentations here. And as I said, this is going to be more on the academic side, but I also want to share some of my work, like as Stuart mentioned, or Jason mentioned, it's in between also this scientific field and, let's say, academic, more anthropological field, and also the artist field. So my first question I want to share with you is, and this is how my work started, is what does it mean to understand the climate crisis, or what does it mean to understand climate change? This is something as a grad student in the anthropology department at Johns Hopkins, that's how I arrived there with that question in my application, actually. What does it mean to understand? Because we know we have scientists doing lots of work with that, but also we have anthropologists asking people what they're doing. We have other people, activists, trying to do work because we all somehow have a sense of what's happening. But what I realized, and basically, this is ideas that I took from other people, was that most that we discuss about climate change is centered on the natural sciences. It's mediated by devices that allow us to read or to get information about natural or earth processes. And also, of course, we put a big effort in understanding economic processes moving this. Yeah, we all know this, right? But for a few people, or that is becoming a larger group of people, this idea of understanding nature or the climate system or a climate crisis, as I'm calling it here, through data visualization, satellite imagery, or climate models, it's anchored in a tradition that not everyone, that for a few people think that that's part of an old way of connecting with nature. Like it's something that you need to, it's like you need knowledge to master nature, and in this case, you need knowledge to understand the process and find a solution, right? This makes a lot of sense. I'm not saying like science is not important. I work with scientists, but I think there's something else, something is missing from that picture. And you know, I'm sure all of you know this, that is this idea of we can look at the Earth as a big, from outside, right? This is one of the first photo ever taken of the Earth as a whole from Apollo 17 mission in 1972. And now we're doing that with satellites, right? So we have better quality images, and we get lots of information about Earth processes we get more information than what we can actually process these days. But the idea is that we have this general idea, like general images, data, like we're collecting every day from different Earth processes, and then that's how we understand what nature is. But what we have, for instance, that climate, it's a very difficult problem. It's not something that is easy to understand in terms of sequences or chain of events, like this caused this and this causes this. I mean, we have some kind of basic understanding, but there's so many processes happening at the same time. For instance, today's weather, you can say there are processes affecting today's weather that started yesterday or even today. Some of them started 100 years ago or even thousands of years ago. There's even processes larger than that how, I don't know, cosmic rays can also affect today's weather. I mean, of course, in different levels and different proportions, but it's not, so climate is this intersection or interaction of different temporalities or processes that have different temporalities. I would say they started a long time ago, started yesterday, today, that also, you know, but then they kind of coincide and create what we call today's weather. But at the end, even for scientists, it's very difficult. Okay, so the only thing I want to share with you with this, and I want to get you from this basic thing, is that it's a very complex problem, very hard to understand, even from scientists. But they are trying to do that, and as it keeps changing, it's becoming harder and harder, right? I mean, if you're going to see, forecasts are like being shorter and shorter, right? Because it's harder to predict, you know, the weather in longer days, because it's becoming more and more complex, because a lot of things are changing that we thought we understood. But then a few people think that climate at the end is a form of history. What actually climate scientists are doing is reading the past history of climate, and then, you know, from archives, and then reconstructing it from there and trying to create models through it. And as this is an ongoing discussion among historians, that only a few stories leave traces for historians, right, that we can find in archives. So we have also the same problem, like what kind of stories do climate scientists are capturing in their models and in their studies, in their papers, right? It's something that they can trace down, that there's, you know, like a information for certain parts of the world are only, like, we can have access to data from certain parts of the world because there's a history of how, you know, different climate variables were measured along history. But also there's a lot of processes that no one has ever measured, and we don't have any, you know, source to reconstruct that. So what happens with all these things that we haven't measured before, right? So then it's how I enter with my, let's say, anthropological, whatever, sense. So I guess the key problem here is how we can engage with a world that is changing, right? I mean, just think about it. Like, we are normally used to understand and read things or describe things that are basically stable, right? But we are facing something that is changing radically, very fast. And then, my take is to go back to some sources of classical anthropology, like Claude Lévi-Strauss, this French anthropologist, that is central for my way of understanding these things. That he had this idea that rather than explaining things, understanding events, the role of anthropology was to communicate the character of an event. And I'm gonna expand that in a little bit, but what does it mean to communicate the character of an event? So the idea is, at the center of anthropology is to share, to describe, to communicate how does an event feel, okay? I know this is kind of sounds like, well, what we're gonna do with that information, but just let me get there. So it's not basically describing the sequence of events that are connected to that event we're trying to describe, but it's actually to understand or share how does it feel? What's the character? Again, think about the idea of a character. So events have a character. And then also I rely on a philosopher. I mean, again, it's not someone who was writing in the early 20th century, and it's actually a philosopher that had controversy with Einstein about the nature of time. I know, again, this is very academic, but when I get there, it's a very interesting idea, because for him, Henry Bergson, for him, things didn't happen in sequences, but they had like this duration. I mean, actually, it comes from the French durée. I don't speak French, but so the idea is not that things have, take long to occur, but that they never stop. So once they start, they never stop. And it's just like things continue happening, right? It's not like, and connect with other events that are happening at the same time. I know this is complicated, but the idea is that an event never repeats itself. This is the thing what's behind this, and never stops happening. So it's a continuity from all the time. So just think about like everything that's happening here is just something that has never stopped happening since, let's say, forever, right? So thinking about climate, you can probably already start seeing where I'm getting to, is that climate is actually something that has, it's connected to the natural history of the world. So it's, no matter it's changing today, right, faster, but there are forces and events that have started long time ago. And they're just like kind of having a new phase today in a way that, of course, I'm not saying that climate change is not happening, but I'm just saying that this is something, it's still the same earth forces moving, right? And that's, I guess, for me, is key, because, and you will see why. So then, going back to my first question, how we understand the climate crisis, right? So at the end, I think for me, and for the way I've been thinking about climate change, is that rather than trying to explain the physics of the problem of climate, it's important as a human endeavor to understand how the human world is connected to these other forces that are happening and moving the world, right? Moving ocean currents, air currents, how our life is also connected to that, and not just like as understanding as a physical problem, but also how ourselves are touched in a way by that. And we have been historically touched, like for generations, and also how these new things are happening are also creating something new. I'm not saying that I don't want to celebrate climate change, but I'm saying that there's something new that climate change is bringing through the world, to our worlds, right? I mean, I know it's creates and it also brings lots of suffering, but there's also something new happening. And I guess if we just look, through physics or through earth sciences, we're missing something that is also how climate change is entering our worlds, human worlds, right? So the idea is, I put it as a question: how do we open ourselves to these forces, that are living and non-living, that actually are bringing a new world, right? So I promise this is the last kind of academic thing, but then the point is, why anthropology? Why do we need an anthropologist to do this? Why anthropology is interested in these things? So this is some kind of basic things that, when someone starts studying anthropology, learn very, at early level, like, is that the whole point of anthropology is like bringing different experiences, or rather than using theory to explain the world, is bringing what's already happening in the world to create theory, right? We go to the field, we talk to people, we go to parts of the world that we think that there's something really new happening, that expands what we understand, that what the human world is, or what the world in general is. So we go to that part, right? And we don't read books to understand that. We go there, of course we read books, but it's, we go to the field and then, but we believe in that. Like, there's some parts of the new of the world, it's happening out there, not in universities, not in a book, not in a research paper. We need to go to the field. That's a way to understand the world. And then we anthropologists use this thing that we call ethnographic method, that it's a way of doing research that is basically a way of understanding, creating knowledge by taking distance from what is familiar to us. So we go to places that are not familiar to us. And not just because we like to go far away, but because in that, creating that distance, we create, it becomes familiar. That's the process. We can only understand it if we take some distance, but then we also need to, right, kind of jumping into that new world that was distant, that what creates the knowledge, the possibility of knowledge, is that it's something that's distant to us. So what happens is that what was far becomes near, or the unfamiliar familiar, and then the near, our own houses, our own lives, the world, the modern world, whatever we believe in, becomes also far, right? So anthropologists are always like in this situation that you are never at home once you start doing this, right? But more than that, it's an important way of creating knowledge about what's happening in the world, what's new in the world, or what are humans able to do, right? So then, this is normally to understanding social processes, things, cultural processes, how people live, how people think about different things. But what I've been trying to do, following other major figures in the field, was to enter what anthropology can do to understand the forces of the earth. And not the forces of the earth as like a physicist, or like as a biologist, or as a climate scientist, but the role of the forces of the earth in our lives, right? I know this sounds kind of mystic, but just think about like our relationship with the sun, or not even with the sun, with sunsets, with light, with air, with rain, precipitation, with, I don't know, lightning bolts, like their kind of anxiety with, these recent events. I mean, recent, whatever, anything that's been happening in the last 5 years, like tornadoes, like droughts or floods or all these things, fires. How that also enters in our life, and not only through, the lens of psychology, right? Like how we are affected, we feel anxiety, we feel fear, but also how physically or materially that's also entering in our lives. And then how we enter into this world. Like as I said, what's new from this world of uncertainty? Well, this is hard for me. Uncertainty, chaos, and unsustainability. What's new? I mean, of course, this is horrible. This is something that it's bringing lots of chaos. It's destroying, bringing lots of suffering. But also, there's something new happening there, and I feel that it's important to remain open to understand this. Right? As I was saying, we're going back to this idea of the character of an event. It's not about explaining only the physics of Earth's climate, but right, to try to translate that into different images, objects, and sensations. And I'm going to get there right now with my work. So this is my field site. This is the glacier I've been talking about. It's called Quelccaya. It's at almost 18,000 feet above sea level. This is actually a satellite image, so it's not actually a photo, but it's an interesting technology for those who don't know about it. It's like basically this is all radiation being sent from the land to the outer space, and satellites can capture these wavelengths that we cannot see, and then these are recreated in computers. So they can capture different things or more precise things that photographs cannot, right? And this is the second photo from there are previous photos. This is, satellites make these images every day because they, circle the Earth. This is from 2010, so it's already, but, you can see some lakes surrounding, right? If you compare it with different photos, that the glacier is shrinking because, it's documented. You can see it here. And, and as I said, this is an image recreated from, using satellites that is actually the energy energy being sent from the land to the outer space. Okay, so I'm gonna get there, but so there's the ice, right? It has its own, I don't want to get into too much of the science of it, but glaciers are actually moving. They accumulate snow. They remain kind of stable. This is shrinking, but still, accumulates. It expands. It has some glacier tongues here, there. There's an ice cap here that puts pressure. It's actually like some people like to say glaciers are rivers of ice, right? Because they move. They're active, right? And I'm going to get back to that in a second. But doing fieldwork here, and actually I do fieldwork in this area that you see it's getting green because there's grasslands there. And these grasslands have been expanding. So when you see these photographs and you compare them, you see that, of course, the glacier is shrinking, but there's more water available, so it's expand. Of course, it has some limits. It's kind of an ephemeral process, or at least it's not going to last forever. But so people, there's more grasslands available. So I work with the people who actually live here, and also I've been to the summit, as I said, to get ice cores because this is also an important site for climate research. But one of the things I want to discuss with you today is that if what counts is the shape of the ice, or what also, right, if you can see that, well, this is not obvious, but this whole area, and if we have like a photo from farther away, we'll notice it with more detail, but this whole area has been shaped, as most of the world is, by previous earlier advances of this glacier. This, according to scientists, this glacier hasn't been this size, that small, for the last 6,000 years. So 6,000 years ago, it was about this size. Something happened and expanded, right? until now, right? So it took, its estimation is that it took like 1,000 years to expand to the largest size, and it retreated took 20 years to retreat that 1,000 years. That what it took the glacier to advance, in 1,000 years. But at the same time, I'm sure you don't need to be a geologist to look at that, but you can see the lakes there. You can see, how the valleys have been carved before by the expansion of the glacier. So what I'm starting to think, or this is something I want to discuss with you, as I said, is like, how we should look at this, like the ice itself is what counts, or the presence of the ice in the area, right? Now, because there's no ice here, but we need to think about that there was ice there, because the history of this place, or the presence of this place, is deeply shaped because of the earlier advances of the glacier. So this idea of the glaciated landscape is important for me, going back to this idea of duration, of like things that never stop happening, right? Because, this is more like technical, or, more like geological knowledge or definitions that, there are this idea of the post-glacial landscape or post-glacial landscape, that there are parts of the world that are shaped by what glaciers did there. Actually, I'm not very familiar with the geological history of Indianapolis, but most probably it was shaped by a glacier too, right? And again, there's no glacier anywhere, but somehow it's here on the glacier, right? This is what I'm trying to say. It's present in the way we have built things, that the way we have valleys, we have lakes, we have rivers, right? So I'm just trying to think through that. Like, what does it mean that glaciers are going to go away probably for a long while, right? Until the next glaciation that scientists estimate is going to take 15,000 years longer to arrive at the next glaciation because of what we're doing with the climate system. But at the same time, at some point they're going to come back. If we want to be here as a species or not, it's a different question, but they might come back, right? But still, what I'm trying to say is that no matter these glaciers are gone, I'm not saying that this is okay that they're going to be gone, but these areas are going to be shaped by the presence of these glaciers, no matter if they are gone, because they're already shaped by even these areas that there's no glacier, right? Even parts of the world that we don't even know there were glaciers in there. And so I'm just going to start sharing some of my photos with you. So what I'm trying to do with this glacier then, right, that this is one of the images, how it looks like. It's in the tropics, so you see this blue sky, right? But at the same time, this is during the morning, the night is completely different, the temperature changes a lot. But using the idea of the glacier as a metaphor of how our life, or life in general, is kind of a continuum with the world in general, right? With all these forces that, as this glacier is changing at this speed, it's also a metaphor of how we are all connected at different levels, right? With these earth forces. This is another photo. So I've been working, as I said, with 4 different, I would say, agents, actors, that somehow are trying to stabilize their relationships with the melting ice of this glacier. So as I said, I've been working with Andean herders, right? They're indigenous people who live there, for 10 years. I've been going there so far. A group of climate scientists that are pretty, famous group of scientists. Actually, the group that invented this field called tropical paleoglaciology. So they're basically trying to read the history of the climate through ice cores from the tropics. And basically it's the most important piece of evidence that climate change is human-made. It comes from research done in these glaciers. It's a very, very important site for climate research. A bird species called the black-fronted ground tyrant, for those who are into bird watching, that for the first time, this species has started building nests on the crevasses of the glacier, because this is a high elevation part of the world that there's no trees there. So as a way of defending from predators, this bird has started building nests on the ice, right? So just imagine that picture. I'm not saying again, I know you can say, oh, this is very poetic, but the world is falling apart. Yeah, I know, but just imagine there's a bird, that this event is creating this bird to change their behavior, to start building nests inside this new, let's say, ephemeral world that's being created, but they're doing that. And also, mining companies, believe it or not, they are already, because of Peruvian legislation, getting mining rights for when the glacier is going to be gone and they're going to start using the area. But they already have them, right? And they're paying their fees every year that are not little money, just to have the right to access to, uranium, lithium, copper, gold that they seem to know or suspect that it's underneath the ice there. But they're already waiting. They already have an idea of the future, how it's going to look like, right? Or what this place is used for, right? So another photo. So again, I'm not going to read all this quote, but what I'm saying is I'm also got myself kind of stuck with doing normal field work there while I was doing there, because I was trying to go there and interviewing people. What do you think about this? What's new, right? And I couldn't interview a bird, right? I couldn't do things like the glacier, right? What's happening, what forces are affecting you. So I have to go through the scientists or through local people that, of course, I admire and I think that's part of my work. But I just felt that there was also the limits of anthropology as a discipline. You need to write papers, and there's some limits of ethnographic writing that you have 20 pages. You need to whatever, write conclusions, discuss the literature. So there's certain things that I was not feeling comfortable with those limits. So I started doing something different that connected me to art, or at least things that I think artists do. I don't consider myself an artist, but I started doing something that I felt was a different way of trying to understand these processes. Not in a way that, as I was saying before, not as if I was trying to understand the logics of things, but just trying to share what I was sensing there, right? To understand what this kind of these forces in a different way, right? Not to explain them, not to say this is going to happen, not anticipate what's the future look like, but just to share, communicate this event in a different way, or more profound way, I would say, or more accessible way. So I started making some recordings, and this is something that Stuart already mentioned. It started like a small side project to my PhD research. Oh, my advisor hated it, by the way, at the time. But I just started, every time I was going there, I started making sound recordings of this place, right? And the idea was okay, I'm just gonna record this place. And I don't know, I started getting more microphones, more equipment, because as you can imagine, I'm gonna share some of my recordings in a bit, but I was just trying to understand what was happening in a way that I was getting there, and it sounded in a way that I was not expecting at all. It's gonna give you an idea of how it sounds like, but there were different sounds, different things happening there, and I thought there was something really profound that was happening, and I couldn't explain it. I couldn't write about it, right? And I know this is something that is not systematic, rigorous. I was not going there, measuring every day at the same time for 5 years, and I'm gonna put this in a database and then whatever, make conclusions. I was not doing that. But this is the way I framing it, right? Like, just it was this singularity, this thing that was happening while I was there, but not as something that was some random thing, but actually something that it was this moment of where a lot of events were happening at the same time, and I was there to record that, right? So this is Levi-Strauss again. As you can see, I'm a very big fan of Levi-Strauss, but as how these things, this not seeing these moments as random events, but as a very important moment, not because it was unique, but not, of course, especially in terms of like there are not other unique events, but just trying to engage with that, let's say, singularity, right? So I started doing those recordings, right? Basically with different types of microphones. I was a grad student at the time, and now, so I was combining like different types of microphones, low and hi-fi, digital, analog recording devices for almost 10 years. As I was doing my fieldwork, as I said, right, mostly in the surroundings of these glaciers at the base. I've been to the summit, but it's not, the summit is just ice covered with snow, so the sounds are not that spectacular there. But basically, I've been recording ice, water bodies, icicles, alpacas, birds that nest in the ice, plants that grow in these newly exposed soils, even shortwave radio signals that are, you can capture, you can get them. This is one of the most remote areas in Peru, and if you bring a shortwave radio, you can get signal from all over the world. So I was also kind of trying to explore that thing, like how remote is a place where you can get radio signals from different parts. So it's somehow connected, like, as it can get the effects of climate change, right? How remote is a place that the atmosphere is warming because of what happened in Manchester 100 years ago, right? So this idea of remoteness also is kind of, for me, challenging, right? And this actually, if you see the water melting there, it's because of something that happened, in a very far away from that part of the world, because, and now it's warm. So it's the idea of remoteness or not connected with the rest of the world or a different history of the world. I think it was a good metaphor that I wanted to challenge. So I'm just going to play some of my recordings. It's a piece I've mixed. So it's kind of, a friend of mine who's a musician helped me to. I'm not going to tell you what's behind, because this is part of the experience I want to share with you, not just to, this is an alpaca, this is, I just want to, again, let yourself get in contact with these sounds as a force, not as something, or not as a source of something that you need to understand what it is, just to listen to it. And as an expression of different connections that are happening in this place that is changing so fast, right? And also as I said that, like, not as something that as a way of proving that we have the power to control nature, but also of how different forms of life are trying to survive as this environment is going through radical change. Ooh, okay, so let's see if this works. Internet. So it's gonna play through the speakers on this TV. Oh, wait, I think I need to. Let me see how to do this. Of course, I had all this set up, but it didn't. Slideshow. No. Of course. Okay. So I'm just. I'm gonna stop here. Thank you so much for listening. Where's this? Okay, thank you. I don't know if you have any questions, or I don't know, Jason. Oh, thanks.